Welcome back. I'm Matt from ferMentors. In case you didn't know, I have another channel that I host called Jaggers Brewing Co. And today's guest on ferMentors is a good friend of mine, Randy Daly. He won't normally admit it that he's a good friend of mine, but we're here today to talk about basically the spirit and the mindset of competitor in homebrew competitions. Before we get into that, though, we are drinking the equal parts black IPA called, what was it, Bonesaw? Bonesaw. It's a pretty good IPA, and as is usual, we're doing what Randy does best, drinking beer and smoking some cigars on today's episode. So, Randy, we're fellow brew club members.
Yes.
That's pretty much how we met. We are both also members in MHP. We have a pretty funny relationship between you and I. We both like to give each other shit.
And we do.
And we do. But I wanted to approach you today because you're a pretty well decorated competitor in the homebrew circuits.
It seems to work out that way, yeah.
It does seem to work out that way. You get to hear Randy Daly's name called quite often in the Lone Star circuit and a few of the other circuits. Some out-of-state things you compete in, I know, occasionally. So you've got plenty of Best of Show awards, plenty of medals.
There's no such thing as plenty, but I have a
couple. You have a couple.
I have a couple.
You got some steins, some goblets, some awesome awards, and we'll kind of get into some of those. But I know of at least one 50-point score you got too. Do you have any other ones past that?
Yes, I had one for a Belgian triple several years ago. I don't remember where we're at now, but yeah, I've had several.
And then your latest one was a Dunkelsbach, right?
Dunkelsbach.
Yes, that was a really good beer. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was good. Wish I had more of it.
I bet. So I think it's safe to say that you know a thing or two about brewing beer, correct?
I like to think so.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe a little.
Yeah. One of the best things that I like about you is even though you know as much as you do, you're willing to kind of help share your experience, your knowledge, which is one of the reasons you wanted to come on today.
Sure.
But another key aspect, I think, too, is you always seem to approach things where, like, you don't know everything, and so you
Who does?
right. But you know, there you do meet some people that are like, no, this is the only way to do it, and you kind of like to ask questions, even when you found out that I don't chill sometimes and don't boil sometimes and don't use temperature control. You still asked, why do you do that?
Why?
What's the advantages? I would never do that, but am I missing something possibly? And so I've always respected that about you. So are you ready to get started on some
absolutely.
questions?
Yeah.
So one of the first questions that I have prepared for today is, so I just brewed my first batch of brew and I want to enter it into a competition. Where do I start? How do I get started down the path of entering competitions?
Well, so I brewed my first beer probably about 10 years ago, probably this week. It was 10 years ago, November, 10 years ago. As an extract kit from Northern Brewer, I think, and as an IPA. And, you know, I thought it was a good IPA. I thought it was good. Well, probably in January, I joined the Masternauts. And maybe not that meeting. The next meeting, they were talking about competitions. I guess that's talking about Blue Bonnet coming up or something. And I remember thinking, I've got an IPA. I've got a good IPA. I want to enter that competition. Well, evidently, my IPA wasn't as good as I thought it was. I think I scored a 26. They told me it tasted like cooked carrots. So rather than maybe get my feelings hurt or like, oh, what the hell, they don't know what they're talking about, I'm like, okay, why? Where did that come from? Then I discovered fermentation temperature that I'd never heard of or thought of or anything else. I'm like, okay, I need to control my fermentation temperature. So I need to I got a chest freezer from an auction and put temperature control on it. And now I had fermentation control. So if you're new and getting started, first of all, I tell you to find a beer club and especially one if you have your choices some around, maybe those that, if you're wanting to compete, that have that competition aspect in that club, at least a mentor that you can find, or somebody you could kind of get feedback on how to get started. If you don't have a club around and you're watching these videos, you're probably aware already of the American Homebrewers Association. Join the American Homebrewers Association. They list competitions all over the country, those that are coming up. You can look in advance and see what's coming up, and kind of go from there. Figure out what you want to enter, when do you want to enter it. Kind of just go from there. One of the things that helped me when I started was figuring out a calendar. There's some beer styles you can have ready in a month, but there's some that really don't peak until, like, let's say 9 months or a year. And if you're wanting to compete with a certain style, kind of figure out when is the best time to enter that beer, or when it peaks. And it takes a little time, a little experimenting, maybe ask some questions, and kind of figure out that calendar, when I want to make it, when's it going to be ready, when's it going to peak. And that's when you kind of want to base what you're entering.
And how long is it good for?
Right. Once it peaks, how long is it good for?
Right.
Got to go from there.
Sure. Another, resource too, to kind of, and maybe we'll get into it a little bit later, is if you're even mildly interested in competing, there is another program called the Master Homebrew Program. It's a fairly new organization. It's been around for a couple years. It's grown into be a really big deal, right? There are things on that site that will kind of give you a rating of a competition, tell you, kind of like what to expect as far as entering that particular competition is, more or less. There's also dates and stuff like that, and then they have their own circuit of America too, that kind of coincides with scheduling brews and stuff.
And a branch off the MHP program is there's a Facebook group called Competitive Home Brewing.
Yes.
And it may be competitions that aren't necessarily part of the MHP COA Circuit of America's competitions, but if there's a little club that's got a competition in
7
Iowa,
states away.
Yeah, they'll post it, and you're like, we're only taking 100 entries. They'll give you the feedback on 100 entries, maybe a certain style even, but you can decide then if you want to at least know about it, and decide then if you want to try to enter it.
Sure. So, are there any limitations on what you can enter, and does it have to be all grain? Which, I mean, I guess we kind of already touched on lightly.
Well, there's two parts of that is limitations. A lot of clubs, a lot of competitions will set an entry cap. It may be 200, it may be 500, it may be 800. So there may be a limitation cap on how many. They may limit you to X amount of entries per individual. Say it's 10. We entered one yesterday that capped out at 500 total and 10 per person. So there's competition limits whenever you find them and decide you want to enter it. There may be limits. They may limit a certain style to X amount of entries. It may be Blue Bonnet, for instance. I think this year they're capping out each style at 32 entries. So if you've got an Irish Red, that's the one you want to enter. You need to make sure you get on there early and get it entered, so that it's in that 32 cap. Otherwise, you missed an opportunity.
Yeah, if you're number 33, sorry about your
luck. Yeah, you got to figure out.
And every competition's built a little differently when it comes to that.
And there's some that take meads and ciders. There's some that don't. There's some that limit it. An example is Spirit of 76. It's all American type beers, American style beers. So there's 13, 14 categories is all they've got. So that's all you can enter. So if you got an ESB, English bitter, it's not going to go into that. It's not going to fit any of them categories. So.
Not easily, anyways.
The score sheets may reflect that.
Right. For better or for worse.
Right. You'll get feedback.
Sometimes it's not about what you meant to brew. It's what you ended up brewing that you enter, right? But that's a whole different topic right there.
Absolutely.
So after I enter a competition, what are the next steps in the process? So I've gone on this website, I've paid my entry fee. What's my next step?
Okay, one is a deadline date when they have to have entries by, and if you're taking them, if it's local and you're taking them, you just kind of figure out when you want to take them. Probably to a homebrew shop that's help coordinating. If you're having to ship them, then you got to figure out when is the ship by date, so that they're by the final date, so that they have them when they get ready to start judging. Then after that, it's a matter of patience. That you get them entered. You can look on your BCOM and see that they've got them, they've received them, you paid for them, everything's good. So then it's patience. You have to wait. It takes about 6 weeks sometimes for a competition to judge all the entries before they have an award ceremony and figure out medals and give out medals or whatever. And then it may be a day or two, in theory, hopefully a day or two before you get score sheets back either electronically or through the mail or whatever. But you got to be patient with all that and wait for them all to come back.
So to talking about being patient and shipping and all that. So shipping, things that you have to consider, right, are things like weather, right? And so if you're shipping something 7 states away, you might want to be a little bit leery about shipping your IPA in the middle of August, right?
You do what you got to do, though.
Right.
So
how bad do you want that IPA possibly judged,
right,
or whatever, right? Also, speaking of shipping, a lot of people don't know this, but it's against the law for you to ship alcohol through the USPS, correct? Places like UPS, FedEx, and there's a couple other places that you can ship, but USPS is absolutely a no-no.
Right, absolutely is. It's illegal to send alcohol through the mail through USPS. Now you can send it through FedEx or any of the other carriers.
Right. You just gotta figure that out.
Right, and there's some shipping apps anymore that you can print your labels off and put them on a box, and all you got to do is take them into UPS and just drop them off.
You don't have to
talk to nobody. Don't have to talk to nobody. If you carry them in and they're boxing it, they may ask you what you're shipping. You tell them beer, they may or may not take it.
I've shipped collectible glassware. I've shipped yeast samples. I've shipped.
I usually just tell them hot sauce.
Hot sauce. That's a good one. I should start using that one. I've said just samples, right. Just samples.
But if you pack it, you got to pack it in a way that I'll tell you right now, they are not gentle. I don't care if you put fragile labels on it or glass labels on it or this side up labels. They really don't care. And so you got to pack it like it's going to be run over by a truck.
Yeah.
Bubble wrap's your friend.
I know they make those shells now.
Yeah, there's
like pod
carriers,
shell or pod.
Gorilla Shippers, I think, some place that's got them. There's another one. Travis Cherry was talking about it the other day, but they make enclosures to keep bottles separated or whatever.
We'll put some links in the description of some of the things that we're talking about here and whatnot to kind of help exemplify. I should have brought a few examples, but
I have one sitting in the kitchen. You want me to grab it?
Nah, okay. We'll figure it out later.
Right.
So the part of being patient, right? So I've entered my first homebrew competition, and I'm trying to be patient. I've got 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever, until I get my results. What am I doing during that point in the process? And because I start losing my shit. Like I start like, I wonder how it's doing. I wonder how it's going. So I got to find some kind of other distraction. And me personally, I just start looking for the next competition and start brewing for that. Start coming up with my game.
I was going to say start brewing. If you need a distraction, start brewing. And you know, I'll tell you what's difficult sometimes. You've got this beer. You've been in a competition. There's another competition comes up. And you're like, well, do I want to enter that? I don't want to enter it until I get feedback from this other one. If they tell me it's good, I want to enter it again. If they tell me it's not, what do I do? And you just got to figure that on your own.
That's completely personal at
right.
that point. I personally, most of the time, I'm more data driven. So I'm like, the more I get that particular beer out there on the circuit and the competitions and stuff, even if it places good in X, it may not place good in Y. But at least I'm getting multiple deals. You know, I try not to ever just dump a beer willy-nilly or stop entering it because it's all data collection for me personally.
Sure, and feedback from different competitions, different judges,
different judging pools.
You're right, different judging pools, different style by, let's say, style by state, if you want to call it that. You know, there's territorial styles that they may view it differently than somebody else might. So
Regional taste differences. Right. Yeah.
And whatever feedback you get on any of it will all help you in the future. So.
Yeah, but there are some things that are on those score sheets that you have to kind of you have to pick and choose after a long set of data stream, like and start saying, okay, these are the repeating characteristics that people are picking out, right?
You probably get into that a little more a little later, don't you?
A little bit, yeah. Okay. But and we'll circle back through
sure.
some of this.
Sure.
So let's see here. We talked about as time goes on, while you're waiting for results, what are you doing that kind of got led into? What resources do you suggest anyone interested in entering competitions? We talked about the American Homebrewers Association. We talked about MHP. What are the differences that you can think of between the two, AHA and MHP?
Okay.
BJCP.
All right. So let's see. I want to get into this. So American Homebrewers Association is a very large national competition. I mean, you're talking several thousand entries. Usually, it's broke up into a dozen or so locations for the first round or whatever.
It's the biggest.
It's the biggest
competition,
homebrew competition probably in the world. I mean, it's massive. To achieve a medal in that competition is quite an accomplishment. I, for one, normally don't enter it. I compete locally more than anything else, so I normally don't enter it. Although I may start in the future, but as right now, I haven't entered it before.
So your first entry into this is going to be with me. We're going to co-brew.
Okay.
And we're not chilling. We're not boiling.
We're going to have to talk.
But
so MHP is a whole nother animal. They have a Circuit of America, and I kind of compete on it a little bit.
Sure.
But it's not something I'm all out, all after, or any of that kind of thing. I just occasionally I may want to I've made a new beer, and I'm kind of wanting feedback on it before I get serious with which competitions I'm going to send it to. So I may send it to 2 or 3 smaller competitions that they've posted on the competitive home brewer Facebook group, and it may not be part of Circuit of America. It's just a competition that I can get feedback for. So I'll box them up and send them. I sent 3 to Oklahoma last week or 2 weeks ago. So
you're not afraid to ship beer anymore.
No, I'm not.
So the BJCP program, which is another resource that we can use as competitive homebrewers, right?
Right. It's probably the Bible you need to start with. It's
the style guidelines.
Style guidelines.
And you can make good beer without following style guidelines, right?
Correct.
But for competition events, right? You're trying to brew to a certain style guideline.
Correct.
And even though, like, my stout, I call it stout, and it may be a stout, it may miss the mark a little bit, above it, below it, off to the side, or whatever the case may be. It may be a mixture of English and American stout.
Like they read the style guidelines for the style of beer you're wanting to brew. That's the first thing you need to do before you make a recipe or find a recipe or whatever. The style guidelines pretty much tell you what this beer is supposed to smell like, look like, taste like, mouthfeel, overall impression. It's going to tell you, that's what the judges are going to go by whenever you send that beer in. So if you're making a beer to this and the judges are judging it to this, you should do well, in theory.
1-to-1.
Right. I mean, this is what you're trying to make. This is what they're judging it at. And if they match up, you should do well.
Often you'll see, though, too, in some style guidelines that it almost writes the recipe for you, too.
A lot of times, a lot of styles, yes.
They'll tell you, look at this particular class of hops, this particular class of yeast, these general malts, right?
And I'll tell you right now, if you're wanting to brew a beer that you like, and you don't care what the BJCP guidelines say, you want to brew it that way, by all means do. I have a rye IPA that I absolutely love.
It's a really good rye IPA.
I love it, and I'll brew it, but I know if I enter a competition, they're going to tell me it's not hoppy enough. That's fine. I know that. If I enter it, I'm expecting them to tell me it's not hoppy enough. but I can drink the hell out of it. And that's really my goal when I make it, is I plan on drinking it while I'm brewing some of these other styles for competition. I have something to drink while I'm brewing.
So number one,
Right.
have fun.
Have fun.
Number two, study those style guidelines and see how close you can get.
Right. And if you're going to get serious about competition, there's a tremendous learning curve that needs to take place. Continue to read, continue to ask questions. There's some books out there. Ray Daniels' book on brewing great recipes. It's fantastic. Gordon Strong has a couple out there that's wonderful.
Brewing classic styles.
And yeah, there's books out there. If you get a chance to take a BJCP class, a tasting test or tasting class,
I wanted to ask you about that.
yeah, by all means do.
That's another resource too, is the BJCP style tasting deals that they do,
Right.
excluding the exam, just
right,
the classes.
just the class. And I'll tell you what, if you get a chance to judge. The more you can make your palate more sensitive to what you're trying to accomplish, the more you can learn and get, for yourself. Take advantage of that. Whether it be try something you never made before or tasted before. Try. Continue to learn. I mean, that's what it's all about, is learning and making good beer. It's all about the beer.
So I think often, like, one of the biggest things that people say as another resource is try to drink different styles, and go outside your norm, and different examples, right? But
I remember when I first started drinking IPAs, I would order one, and I'm like, okay, I'm not sure I like this. I'm not sure I like this. After about 2 years, every time I went in somewhere, the first beer I tried was an IPA to see if I liked it or not. After about 2 years, I kind of figured I must like it, or I'd quit ordering some bitches. So
right, there's got to be something to it.
Right. So I'm like, okay, I like IPAs, I guess, because I keep buying them.
But I guess after you spend about a year or two on, like, trying to enter things, you start getting these feedbacks of where some people are saying, oh, I taste this, I smell that, and you're like, I'm unfamiliar with that particular taste or that smell. So then you try to find a food that has that to help build your palate, right?
Right.
Is there any other things that you can do for palate building? And
other than, if you get a chance to judge, you get to sit down with an experienced judge, and you can learn from them. If you get a chance to judge in a competition, by all means judge. And even if all you do is show up and be a steward, you'll get to sample the beers, get to hear the judges talking about it, and it will improve your knowledge about beer and also your palate as far as what you're tasting. That's
another good point too. Is these homebrew competitions, they need people there. If you're certified or not the judge, right? They need someone there to hand out the beers for these tables. They need someone to be a non-certified judge sitting at a table, so that way they can branch out to different tables.
Sure.
And all that just helps build a better foundation for you as a brewer.
Right. And having that knowledge about what you're looking for, what you're tasting, you're getting your palate kind of calibrated to what's what. And
I kind of related a lot to, like, you get to see how the sausage is made a little bit, and and sometimes you're like, okay, I entered this thinking that a judge is really looking for XYZ, but they're not. They're actually more lenient on some of this stuff, where I thought I had to really nail color and head retention and things like that. We're more worried about flavor and mouthfeels and overall impressions,
Well, we'll get into it a little further when we start talking about judging, but all that comes into play.
Sure, absolutely. So, let's see here. So, what if you don't have a homebrew club? We kind of talked about that a little bit, about there being some online resources such as the competitive homebrew community on Facebook. There's forums, there's online homebrew clubs that you can kind of attend and things like that.
Sure.
But if Randy Daly found himself without a homebrew club, moved away tomorrow, and still wanted to enter, what would Randy Daly do?
Well, like I say, there's resources to find out about competitions. If that's what you want to do, is find a competition to enter, you can find them. Face That Foot Competition Homebrew group on Facebook is fantastic for listing competitions. Right now, like, Circuit of America has one in all 50 states. So if you're in a state that you might chase down when that competition is. Like I say, go judge, go steward. There you may run into people that are in the same situation you are, and figure out what they do. Maybe you start a club. So there's opportunities out there. If that's what you're wanting, just go find them.
There's also though, so I've got a couple beer pen pals that don't have homebrew clubs. The nearest one's 3 hours away or so, and so for them, really, it's easier for them to ship me beer and ask me, hey, what do you think about this too? So, that's another outside the box kind of solution. I don't know how meaningful that is to anybody, but
yeah, it's if you want to find it, go find it. It's out there. It's just a matter of finding it.
So you just came up with a recipe that you've never brewed before, and may not be a style that you've ever brewed before. What do you do next?
Well,
how do you approach that?
First of all, read the style guidelines. It's going to tell you what you need to know about what that is, and if you got enough knowledge, a knowledge base on the grains and hops that's going in it, you can look at it and say, yeah, okay, that's what I want to do. Or you may like, okay, I don't want that hop, or I don't want it that dark. I'm going to take some of that chocolate malt out of it, or something like that. But style, if you want to enter it, style guidelines is what the judges are going to be going by. So it's need to be what you go by when you're brewing it. So kind of look it over, get familiar with the grains. That's another place that you increase your palate or whatever. You kind of know what them grains are going to do to your beer or taste like in your beer. By all means, go from there.
So you're the current education officer for our brew club, and I remember a couple years ago you did a test on malts, and so you basically made essentially a mash.
Malt teas, yeah, made a mash.
Yeah, you basically made a mash and unfermented or whatever, but you're getting that raw appeal towards what that particular grain does.
When I first started, I would go to the homebrew store, and Mindy used to laugh at me, but I'd have to break my recipe down into roughly 20 parts, and if it was supposed to be, 75% two-row, I would count out X amount of grains to get my 15 whatever counts of grain, and then I'd put like a chocolate and a roast in it, and I would chew them up to kind of get the flavors I was after.
Wow.
Just to make sure that's kind of what I was on to my beer. It's not as accurate. I mean, you get some astringency off them grain husk, whatever. It's not accurate, but you kind of get a feel for what it's supposed to taste like.
It's not 100% way to do it, but it's a step closer.
Right, and if you're
going in blind,
just starting out, it's a good place to start, just to kind of get a feel for what them grains are and what they're going to do to your beer. Essentially, at some point, BJCP has I think it's in a educational part where they tell you how to make a grain tea, where you make that mash and you have like 400 grams of grain versus X amount of water, and you mash it like that and let it sit 30 minutes, and then strain the grains off, and you go from there and taste it. So it talks about it there. Also some hop teas so that you can do the same thing with hops.
Yep.
But it's always an educational thing where you're trying to improve your beers and as a result improve your score sheets when you do submit beers.
There's also off flavor kits and things like that too.
They're a little pricey for a person to buy them. If you had a club that wanted to do it, you can get into the off flavors, and that's always a learning curve, especially if you go to a class that's doing it and get a chance to sample them off flavors and kind of know what you're looking for to improve your beers.
Or you just find somebody that likes to brew with Clyke, and then
there's that.
So, how much weight do you put into a score on a brew the first time out? And when do you really start to get a true sense of that brew as you're starting to submit it through competitions?
That's a good question. Early on, I would put a lot of emphasis on your score sheets. That's really all. You can brew beer and share it with your buddies, and as long as it's free, they're going to tell you it's the best thing you've ever made. You want honest feedback, enter a competition, get honest feedback. Now, when you're starting out, all that feedback's important. They tell you it tastes like cooked carrots, and you're trying to figure out why. It's important. It was a game changer for me when I figured out fermentation control. It's part of it. But as a whole, there'll be a time in there when you come to the realization that you probably know more about that beer than the judges that are judging it. you may know if it's got a little bit of an off flavor in it, and you're like, okay, it's not necessarily a flaw. It's allowed in that style, but then it's interpretation of judges on how it impacts them. They may think it's a massive flaw, and you may think it's not. So when they tell you it's got this flaw in it, you're like, okay, I knew it did. You take it with a grain of salt and go from there.
But everybody tastes things differently on the judging table too, so you kind of have to take a couple things with some grains of salt when you start to get these back, and that's why you want to enter that particular beer in a couple different competitions anyways. But what is the cutoff that if you see like 3 score sheets that are 27s, right? Are at that point, are you just done with that beer?
As far as entering it?
As far as entering it.
Possibly, yes.
Okay.
If it's like my rye IPA, it hasn't scored well, but I like it, I'll drink the hell out of it regardless. But if I know it's going to get a 27, you might be better off saving your $10, $12 entry fee.
$14 now.
Or 14 on some of them. Might be better off saving your money and rebrewing either that beer or another beer and try to get it more to style guidelines. So there's a learning curve on there. Do I still want to enter it? No, maybe not. Maybe I'll just rebrew it and save your money and do that. So.
I've kind of got to the point where I wait about a year of data collection on a particular brew before I make any kind of adjustments, right? Because I have found that sometimes that beer first out will score that 27, but by the end of the circuit, it's scoring, higher 30s and lower 40s. It
depends on the beer and the style and all that, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Absolutely, sure. But so don't necessarily just give up, but take a step back and reevaluate what your goals are, right?
You may not want to enter it, but you may save it for try it again in 6 months and say, okay, that's a different beer than it was 6 months ago.
Sure.
And then enter it from there.
Let's see here. What are the keys to success to getting back a good score sheet?
First of all, make good beer. Now let's talk about that.
We're going to be here a minute.
So you have a recipe, and I'll tell you right now, all your numbers matter. And I've brewed with guys like, I got an extra 1/8 of an ounce of hops or 1/4 ounce of hops. It don't matter. My water profile's a little off, but it don't matter. All that matters. And I get a little finicky on my numbers when I'm off or whatever. I'm like, my pre-boil gravity should be this, and it's 3 points off. Why? And I get all stupid, like, okay, why am I off? If you fix it there, then by the end of the boil, it should be fixed. So all them numbers matter. Get that in your head right now. All the numbers matter. If it calls for 0.56 ounce of hops, figure out 5.6 ounce of hops, and that's what you go with. Saying it's 3/4 and that's close enough, I'm going with it. No, there's a reason them numbers are the way they are. Another was like sparge water. You calculate a recipe and it's calling for 6.3 gallons of sparge water. I'll just run 8 in it, and if it's a little more, I'll boil it off for an hour. No, there's no sense
that adds up.
Right. 5.6 gallons of water. Get 5.6 gallons of water in there. Don't go 8 thinking, it's all right. It matters.
I remember coming back to you one time with a score sheet that was like a 36, and I said, Randy, what are the 1 or 2 things that I can do to get this in the 40s? And you're like, Matt, it's not 1 or 2 things. It's like 5 or 6 small things. Like you know.
And I'll tell everybody, there'll be people ask me, what do I got to do to make a really good beer? And I'm like, making a really good beer isn't 1 or 2 things. Now, you can talk about the biggies: fermentation, temperature control, yeast propagation, having enough yeast. Yeah, that's the biggies. But it's really 50 little things that you learn to do, and it's learning your process. And it's about 50 little things you learn to do by rote, more or less, that you do the same way each time you brew, and you just kind of learn that. And by learning that process, at some point, you're getting 35, 36s on your score sheets, but you continue to do that, doing it, and you finally get that process down, then all of a sudden them score sheets are 39s and 40s, and it's like a light switch gets kicked on, and them score sheets start improving.
Things like coming down a couple degrees in your fermentation temperature.
Right, or jacking it up to do a rest,
Yeah.
it's like 50 little things you learn to do same way every time, and kind of go from there.
I absolutely agree. I'm excited for this upcoming year. For me personally, I'm hoping to meet certain goals of basically just entering, two per competition and trying to break out of those mid 30s and kind of get them into higher 30s, 40s areas. Well, kind of the shift that I'm aiming for.
Gordon Strong has a book called I want to say it's called Brew Better Beer or Brewing Better Beer or something like that. Mm. But he talks about one of the analogies he's got. He compares a master carpenter to being a brewmaster. And he's basically what he says is that master carpenter, that doesn't mean he doesn't make mistakes. It's just he knows either how to correct them or how to hide them so that they don't pop back up later. And it's the same way with being a master brewer or learning your craft. Is you're going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but how can you get them mistakes where they're either hidden or you correct them or whatever? And that's part of learning your system, learning your process, learning to do things the same way, like say 50 times or whatever.
Sure.
And getting it where you're kind of, what's going to happen, what your process is going to do. I do this is what's going to happen with that. And learn your process.
So do you think that sometimes we put too much emphasis on score sheets and sometimes that the brew gets lost in the shuffle between these score sheets?
Yeah, as competing as much as I do, there's a lot of times that I'm so focused on BJCP guidelines that occasionally I have to force myself to stop and think outside the box and said, okay, I need to do a creative beer, something that's outside the box that's not BJCP guideline. Yeah. I did recently, probably a year ago, I did a lemon pie sour that's kind of outside the box. I did a black Kolsch that was not a style guideline for a black Kolsch, something experimental.
Right.
But yeah, you just kind of occasionally do that.
Flex those creative muscles.
Right.
Of yours.
I've got a Gosa right now that I put hatch green chilies on 10 gallons of it. That you guess you put it in this fruit and spice beer or spice bear category. I probably won't. I'll probably just drink it. But I put a pound of hatch green chilies on it on secondary, and in fact, I need to keg that tomorrow probably. So
that's a pretty interesting beer. I'm waiting to be able to taste that one.
But it's, occasionally you have to just say, style guidelines. Tell the style guidelines I want to brew something outside the box, and just you can't compete with it, or you could, I guess. But I probably won't enter experimental, and I probably won't enter a spice beer, but you could. But you need to do something outside the box, just creatively every now and then.
Sure. So the next question that I had, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, but as someone that may be new to brewing competitions, what additional steps do you suggest that they take? We talked about going to these judging sessions and being a steward there and all that. How important do you think as a new competitive brewer it is to go to these like award ceremonies and stuff like that? You may not think that you may win, you may know that you're not going to win, but how important would it be for a new brewer to maybe attend some of these things?
Well, to me, one of the reasons I compete is for the fun of it. I compete so that my buddies can give me a hard time when they beat me for whatever reason.
Sure.
And I can give them a hard time whenever I beat them for whatever reason. The camaraderie and the fun of brewing is amplified when you go to a beer competition. You get a chance to go to Blue Bonnet here in Texas. Or we had an event yesterday that kind of brought some local beer clubs together. There's nothing wrong with hanging around with your beer buddies and drinking beer and having a good time. So.
And you get to maybe sometimes even talk to someone that's at another club that you wouldn't normally have access to and say, hey, let me pick your brain for a minute.
Right. And you can throw them out a question. They may or may not answer you. They may or may not answer you truthfully. But you can say, hey, I had your beer. What can I ask what you did to do that? And they may tell you, they may not.
Right.
But it's a good time. There's people that will answer your questions. So, yeah, you can go around and talk to people. And it's not a formal setting like a beer club meeting per se. It's just guys drinking beer and want to talk about beer. So,
and a lot of times you'll find yourself around some excellent homebrew that you're able to sample and then try to pick out those profiles and this and that. So you might say, oh, okay, like I brew this IPA. What's different between theirs and mine? Maybe I need to start shifting mine a little bit more towards this.
Well, if you go to a competition and get to hang out with people that love beer, that are there for the same reason you are, that's a good way to spend an afternoon. It's just a good way to spend an afternoon.
For sure. Let's see here. So for competitive brews, we need quality ingredients: water, grain, hops, yeast, etc. For mead and cider, you need good quality honey, good quality water, good apple sources for your ciders. For a good recipe, what else are we missing in that kind of mindset of the good things, right?
Well, there's a couple of things you need to kind of focus on, and I mentioned them earlier. The biggies is fermentation control and also yeast propagation. And I'll go even further to just say yeast health in general. People make wort. Yeast makes beer. And whatever it takes to make your beer or make your yeast happy, by all means do it. And that means pitching enough or pitching just slightly below if you're trying to get those kind of phenolics. But know your yeast. Know what they're expecting. And it's all about yeast health, whether it be giving them nutrients, whether it give them the water profile they need, the pH they need, temperature control. Yeast are finicky. They're pretty delicate cells.
It's a living creature.
It's a living creature, but they're very delicate. But they will either make or break your beer. So whatever yeast health, yeast happiness, happy wife, happy life, happy yeast, happy beer. Keep that in mind. So yeah, go from there.
I know a lot of times it's easy to kind of get envious sometimes of some people's brewing setups, right? Be it that their kettle setup or their fermentation setup, glycol chilling and stuff like that. I know like you and I kind of have maybe not a similar approach, right? But we have a more simple process for brewing. I brew in a bag, so I don't have to worry about all the kettles and sparging and all that. I have temperature control that's kind of like a base set with a cooler and pump and all that. I use ice water, not glycol. I know that you kind of have some similar deals too. So a lot of times it doesn't take thousands of dollars to make good beer, correct?
Correct. So I have a pretty elaborate setup.
Sure.
I mean, I do, but it's not necessarily to make good beer. It's just convenience of making that beer. When I first started, I do an extract kits on the kitchen stove, but at some point I went to igloo coolers, where I had an igloo cooler, 10-gallon mash tun, and a 10-gallon hot liquor tank that gravity fed into. You've seen the stair step setups.
Right.
That's what I had. Still have it. It's sitting out in my storage building. I'll drag it out for brew-ins or whatever. But just because I have now a 30-gallon electric system, or I go to them 10-gallon coolers, as long as you know your process, you can still make good beer. I won my first stein on them igloo coolers. I have no qualms about digging them out and making a competition beer with them igloo coolers tomorrow, if that's what I think I need to do.
Right.
But it's a matter of learning your process, no matter what it is. Learn that process. Learn your process. Know how to fix it if something comes up. And go from there. But you don't have to spend thousands of dollars. I could do an analogy of fishing. You can fish with a $5 cane pole on the bank, or you can fish in a $70,000 bass boat and a $500 rod and reel. End of the day, there's a pretty good chance that person with the cane pole on the bank is going to catch just as many fish and just as big a fish as that guy out there in the bass boat. Figure out where your niche is and learn that niche, whether it be igloo coolers or brewing a bag, a Brewzilla, Grainfather. Learn your system, your processes, and yeah, you knock out great beers. I know there are several competitive brewers that brew on the Grainfathers or the Brewzillas. And I'll tell you what, the all-in-one system to a large degree has changed competitive brewing.
Yes.
There are people that couldn't have done it because they wanted a 3-vessel system or whatever, didn't have room, they lived in an apartment. there are people down there with a Grainfather or Brewzilla that's brewing, and I say 5 gallons. There's some of them brewing 3-gallon batches that are making extraordinary beers and competing with them. So you don't get locked up into your system. It isn't necessarily your system. It's a matter of you learning whatever process you do have.
For your entry into competition, what is the best way to package and submit? I know that we talked a little bit about some of the shipping deals, the clamshells and the bags of puffed air and bubble wrap and all that, but bottle conditioning, bottling from the keg, canning, I know some of it's even style dependent, right?
Right. Yeah, you take your Belgians, in theory, a lot of times you will bottle condition those, your big beers, your barley wines, and some of your stouts you may want to bottle condition, put sugar in them and let them carbonate in the bottle, and then you stick them in a closet for a while until you decide you want to start entering them. Most of the time, I keg my stuff. I keg most of my stuff in store kegs for aging. The exception would be that it's Belgians. A lot of times, most of my Belgians, I'll end up bottle conditioning. And I generally use Belgian bottles because I usually put a little more higher carbonation on them than what standard bottles, in theory, can take.
Sure.
But yeah, for the most part, I don't have a canner. I know people that do and use them. They seem to like them. And some competitions now are starting to allow some cans. Some competitions allow cans. Used to, they didn't. But anymore, there's a few that do. So it kind of just depends on what you want to do. Bottling from a keg is sometimes tricky. There's another process you got to kind of learn.
And then how are you bottling from the keg? Are you using the counterflow?
Counter pressure.
Yeah. Are you doing the beer gun? Are you are you just hooking a hose to your tap and?
So let's talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about that. So if you're kegging or bottling from a keg, there's some things you can do to help with that. I usually run pressure up on the ones that I'm going to bottle the night before to about 15 pounds, so that I've got a little more higher pressure on them. It seems to help with head retention when I get them bottled. Adjusting that down with when you go put CO2 on it to push it to your bottle, you got to turn it down to about 3 or 4 pounds, just enough to push it.
So you crank it up to 15, right? Do you purge that pressure before you bottle?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And so then at that point, now you've got 3-4 pounds
just to push
the beer into the
right.
Maybe that's where I've been messing up.
Glad we had this conversation.
I'm happy we had this conversation too. Yeah. Because I've had to go bottle, and then I kind of end up jacking a little bit with my pressures as I'm going.
Well, and I do too. Another thing we can do is chill in theory, I normally don't so much, but supposedly if you chill your bottles before you
I've heard that. I haven't done it yet.
I generally don't do it either. They're normally in the garage, so they're not too hot. I could set them on top of that sheet, and I do that when I get them sanitized and they're on the rack, the draining rack. I'll set them on top of my chest freezer. I'll have the chest freezer open where my kegs are at, and I'll set it on top of them kegs and let it sit there while I'm filling, and I just reach in there and grab the next one. So I do set them on top of that. I wouldn't necessarily say I chilled them, but they're probably sitting cooler than they would be sitting on a table or something.
Okay, that's a good hint. I'm gonna have to try some of this. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So here's kind of a fun question: how do you come up with such diverse names for your brews? Because I know that's a whole nother thing, and I know there's a lot of playing back and forth, inside jokes sometimes, but
I hate that part of it.
I know a lot of people do hate it.
I hate it. In fact, Mark Rendon, who competes in the North Texas circuit, he just names his beer by style. It's Saison. That's all he names it.
Saison 1.
Yeah, Saison 1, Saison 2, whatever. But I a lot of times think that's the best way to go.
Right.
But a lot of times it just depends. Come up with something. Maybe even after your dog or your kids or somebody you don't like and whatever.
So you're kind of known to be a little bit of a smart ass, and so seeing some of the names that you come up with have been pretty fun throughout the years.
Yeah, I hate that part of it though. I hate trying to come up with names. I hate it.
So, typically speaking, what would you say that the average age of a beer that you're submitting into these competitions is?
It depends on style. It's style driven. You know, if you got an IPA, you need to be serving it the next month or whatever. It could go early. If you got a Russian Imperial Stout, it might be better to set that in the bottom of a closet for a year or 2 years and wait for it.
Let it just hang out.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I won 3 gold medals with beers that were all 2 years old or older. And another one is Hank Keller with the Dixie Cup. Not Dixie Cup, with Foam Rangers. He won a Pro-Am with his, I guess his English Strong, or I guess his barley wine. But they were like, he bottle conditions them and sets them back, and they're like 2 years old or 3 years old, and he ages his barley wine. So, yeah, it depends on the style and on what you're trying to accomplish. At some point, those beers have a peak time period.
Sure.
And it may be next month for an IPA. It may be 6 months for a barley wine. It may be a year for that barley wine. But figure out the peak times, peak dates about when that beers you think are going to peak. And it may be sampling one once a month, or, you know, every 2 months or whatever. But once you kind of get that figured out by style, peak-wise, get you a calendar and like, okay, I want this beer, I want to do a barley wine by this competition. And it's, let's say it peaks in 9 months. So if this is in October, you need to be brewing that beer in January.
Yeah.
So get a calendar, kind of base it on what styles you're brewing for what competitions, and base on peak times for those beers. Because, you know, it's sad that you get a barley wine that's like 3 months old, and you're drinking it, tasting it, judging it, and you'll be like, man, I'd like to taste this in about 6 months from now instead of today.
Right.
So keep that in mind. You might be better off to save your $10 and put it on something else or another beer or something than to say a 3-month-old barley wine that'll be better than 6 months.
And sometimes you get that Baltic Porter where you're like, man, this was a hell of a beer about 3 months ago.
Yeah. You know, so they all peak. You have a peak time for depending on style, and you need to figure out when those peak times are and base your brewing calendar on that for the competitions you want to enter.
Sure. I tried to do that. I'm not always the best at it. Last year I got caught not paying attention to, some of the competitions coming up, and so I ended up bottle conditioning a Berlinerweisse a week before turn-in. Yeah, and the score sheets reflected that.
Yeah,
oh yeah, they beat me up. Said, man, the carbonation level just threw this whole beer off. It's unpleasant. It's like they made sure that I knew to not ever do that again.
And you took notes.
That is there to make sure that I don't do that again. So what's more important, score sheets or medals?
I'm probably the wrong person to be asking that. I'm not a medal hound. Up until this year, if I got a medal, I'd do it in a box. My wife, for an anniversary present, bought me this beautiful rack thing made out of stainless. It's got little fingers on it so you can slide your medals on or whatever. So I'm now using that because she gets her feelings hurt if I don't. So anyway, I've got to where I start hanging my medals on this silly rack that I've got in the garage. I've got a box of medals that I drug down, and I'm starting to hang some of them on. I got another box up there. One of these days I'll drag down and go from there. But I'm not a medal hound. And score sheets, I kind of take score sheets with a grain of salt. I'll look them over, and if they acknowledge something, I think's going on with that beer, and they're saying the same thing, I acknowledge that and figure out how to fix it. A lot of times, I read through them and acknowledge it and
move on about your business.
Yeah,
I got you.
I'm not so sensitive. I get my feelings hurt when they tell me it tastes like crap or something. So I don't get my feelings hurt. So I just move on.
Sure. What's your favorite award or medal that you won, and do you have any that you've been eyeing over the last couple years that you haven't quite achieved that you want to grab?
Yeah, there's several out there that's kind of funny. Actually, one of my favorites, one of my biggest achievement was actually a third place medal.
Really?
Yeah. So St. Arnold's the Big Bash Brew Bash.
Okay.
Where they pick out one style.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to enter 2 beers for that style. A few years ago, they did a ESB. I entered my 2 ESBs, and both of them advanced to the best of show table or whatever. And I ended up getting a 3rd place and a 5th place out of 112 entries. There were 112 ESBs. I got 3rd and 5th out of 112. So I thought that was a pretty good accomplishment.
Sure.
I like, and it wasn't a trophy. It was the ribbons. You got the ribbons. But to me, that was a big achievement. The other one is I got a 3rd place best of show at Bluebonnet for an English porter. You're looking at 1,500 entries to get 3rd place out of 1,500 entries.
That's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with that.
I think anybody should be happy with that.
Right, and I've got several Steins from Bluebonnet and a couple of best of shows from here or there, but those are the ones that really stand out to me. And they're not. It's funny, they're not 1st place medals or anything like that.
Sure.
That 3rd place out of 1,500 was, granted, I got a Stein with it, but getting 3rd place best of show out of 1,500 entries I was pretty happy with that.
Right. I know, like OpFirm does goblets. I really want a goblet.
This year.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. Spirit of 76 has a pretty cool Stein deal. Bluebonnet has a pretty cool Stein. So it'd be kind of cool to be able to get some of the local things, because
Sure.
I pretty much am just local. Every once in a while I'll throw something into maybe Louisiana if we're making a run out there exchanging entries and stuff like that.
Sure.
But yeah, those kind of got a calling to me, especially because they're local, right?
Right.
I know.
And locally you can go to those events, and they're always a good time. That one in Louisiana is a fun time. We have a good time there.
Oh yeah. I haven't made it out there yet.
Bluebonnet's a good time. OpFirm will be a good time.
Yeah.
Lunar's a good time. Dixie's a good time. So yeah, if you get a chance to go, those are good opportunities to go.
Man, the Bowie knife that they had for, what was it, Spirit of 76?
No, that was for, and actually it wasn't on the circuit. It was San Antonio Cerveceros.
Yeah.
Had their own competition. They're trying to get on the circuit, and hopefully they'll make it next year or year after. But yeah, they give away a Bowie knife that was engraved. It was pretty cool.
One of our guys won it.
Yeah, and the other club in San Antonio, Bear Brewers, they give away a sword.
Yeah.
An engraved sword, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Those
are best of show though.
Right, they're best of show awards.
Yeah.
But that's what the ones I'm wanting to win. That's what those are.
Right.
Bernie Beer Fest, they give away that like boxing belt. It's a wrestling belt. I'd like to get one of those.
Yeah. Your nephew's got 2, doesn't he?
You don't have to bring that up.
Oh man. So we talked about what was the most awesome award that you've accomplished, right? But what's the most awesome one that you've seen? And I guess the wrestling belt.
That belt's pretty cool, and that sword from Bear is pretty cool. And a Stein. Anytime you get a Stein, there are a lot of good brewers never get a chance at a Stein.
Sure.
So
and it's getting tougher and tougher.
Oh yeah, they don't make it easy.
Every year,
Yeah.
it seems to we're getting. People are really starting to figure out what to do, and it's. I think in the next, 5 years, it's probably going to be really tough to walk away with anything.
Well, and for a new brewer, I can tell you right now, it's like I say, it's tough. Those competitions are tough. Like I say, there are some good brewers that never get a Stein at Bluebonnet. They never get one. It's just competition-wise, it's just difficult to win against 1,500 entries. So bear that in mind. Don't get discouraged. Just
some tables are tougher to
absolutely
to medal in, even because we've seen it in our own club where someone scores a 47, which is a really high score, and not walk away with a medal.
Sure, it happens fairly often.
It does. Yeah.
To yours truly. I whine a little bit, but I get over it.
You don't hold grudges, do you?
Well, I'll tell you what, we talked about Master Home Brewer Program, which there are people that compete on that Circuit of Americas, and we mentioned Blue Bonnet, it's on the Circuit of Americas.
Yep.
So of them 1,500, there's a large portion that are extremely good brewers from several different states that are now sending beers into this competition. So the fact that you losing to
someone in Michigan,
right? Yeah,
Maine, and you're in Texas. Yeah,
I was thinking Bill Boyer. You lose to Bill Boyer, you got nothing to be ashamed of. You just
no, yeah, that's true too. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Andy used to sweep up to Jeff Oberlin. He sweeps up.
Yep.
And you lose to them guys, you got no reason to feel bad about it. You just got beat by some really good beers.
Yeah. So as someone that's competed as long as you have, where do you think on the competition side that there has room for improvement? And is there anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. Was Op Firm yesterday? They capped out at 500 beers. Well, it was almost full in like 2 hours. They capped out at 10 beers per person. But if you're a new brewer, you're wanting to enter your first competition. I got this great IPA that tastes like carrots or whatever, but I want to enter it. I would like to see competitions cap out, or at least make accommodations for new brewers to be able to still enter their beers. And we need to reach out to the new guys that's wanting to compete. Whether I get to enter, let's say, 30 beers in a competition, isn't a big deal to me. I do it, I don't do it, whatever. But a guy that's got his first beer and he's wanting to enter it and he can't because you reached your cap in 2 hours.
Yeah.
We need to do something different about that.
I know you've been a big proponent of that. We've talked about it over the last couple of years of that's kind of like one of your small pet peeves of it is you want to see more newer brewers entering it and having success and at least trying to get their beer somewhere where outside of just their club or their region or whatever that it can be judged.
Right. And like I say, a new guy that's got he's only got one beer, he's wanting to enter it. Whether I get to enter my 20, if it's 20 or it's 10 or whatever, isn't necessarily a big deal to me. But we need to help the newer brewers, if they want to compete, learn those ropes. Get involved, get a beer in, get some feedback, improve your beers. And I'll tell everybody, if I can help you brew, I'll come over and brew with you. I'll help you figure out your processes.
Sure.
I'll help you on recipe creation. I'll help whatever you need me to do. But man, I'd like to see new brewers get a chance to at least enter their beer rather than cap out at X amount and they don't get a chance to enter it.
Sure. So, I guess with all that said, do you have any closing thoughts, any closing hints that we haven't touched upon?
I thought of something a while ago, but I forgot what it was. Give me a second. Don't get discouraged by your score sheets. And I talked about it earlier. My only goal when I enter a beer is to make the mini best of show, the next round. And you can do that with a 35, 36 sometimes. You can make the next table. Next competition, you may enter that same beer and get a 40 out of it. Next competition, you may get a 27 out of it. It varies.
Sure.
Judges aren't infallible. Everybody's palates are different. Just don't get discouraged. Just have your goal, like I'm going to enter this beer and it's going to get me a gold medal. Just hope it makes the second table. A mini best of show is my only target. That's my only goal when I enter a beer is to make the mini best of show. On that note, give feedback on that beer. If I bring you a beer and you taste it and you're like, okay, I don't think it's going to get you a medal, fine, I'll save my $10, $12, whatever, and I'll rebrew it and maybe get closer next time than I did this time. Maybe it's got phenolic to it, and okay, I'll run it, pour it down the drive or whatever, and I'll save my $10 and rebrew it. So don't get discouraged. Take feedback where you can get it. Go from there, and have your goal to be just make the next table. That's really all you can do. And
after that, it's almost anybody's game.
Right. If it gets to the second table, it's kind of a free for all, because you get to the second table. Let's say you got 8 beers that's on that second table. You got to assume all 8 of them beers are 40-point beers.
Right.
I mean, competition level has gotten so good as far as home style beers that competition is so intense that there's a table of 40 beers. You got the 40-point beers, 8 of them, all of them are 40-point beers. And then it's just kind of what judges' palates kind of go wherever they go, you know. And I don't know that you need to do anything to your beer to improve it. You know, next time it may be a different
luck
judge.
of the draw. You're going up against those people that are, like you said, they sweep up on competitions and stuff,
Right.
and
there are good brewers out there, so don't be discouraged. But
Right.
get feedback where you can get it. Maybe a month before, a few weeks before competition opens. If you get a chance, give us some beer guys. Get some feedback. Do I enter it? Do I not enter it? Do I save my money? And kind of go from there.
Sure. Well, thank you guys so much for stopping in, checking this out. We really appreciate the viewership, all the subscriptions, and all that. If you've got any hints that you can think of that we might have missed, or any advice for new brewers or brewers looking for a little bit more of an edge, please comment down below. Don't forget to check out the descriptions for all the links on some of the extra stuff that we talked about, like MHP, the BJC style guidelines, score sheets. I'll have a link for that, so you can review those too and kind of see, what we're talking about. But with all that said, thank you so much, Randy, for having me over here at your house and sharing a beer and a cigar.
Sure. Always a good time.
I think we're going to finish this up off camera. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Until next time, cheers.
Cheers.